Have you ever climbed up a tree?
Yes.
Remember doing it as a kid? Some of you may have done it. Or you climbed up something that you shouldn't have. Probably have done that too, right? You climbed up on something that you shouldn't have climbed up on. A tree with sturdy low branches offers an invitation to climb up and to look all around and see the world from up high. There's also the possibility of falling out of the tree, right? And winding up in the emergency department. Or the possibility that once you've climbed up, you can't get down. I don't remember climbing trees growing up, but I do remember hiking and climbing over trees that have fallen in the woods. And even with that, you need balance. When we were younger, we were more flexible and maybe more adventurous. So how many of you would consider climbing a tree today? There are some hands going up.
Kids.
Definitely the younger ones, right? All right, I wouldn't. I wouldn't even have to think about climbing over trees at this point, because when we used to walk through the woods and walk over fallen trees, we would sometimes walk on them like a balance beam. And we would walk out on the trees over the creek just to be able to sit there and to be able to look out over the creek. Nevertheless, climbing trees can be challenging. It can be a challenge. You need to make sure the branches are sturdy and strong, that they don't break once you put your weight upon them. Tree climbing can be challenging depending on the type of tree. Now, I talk about my nephew Chris a lot. He gives me a lot of sermon material. So one summer he was I think he was in elementary school, and it was summertime, and he decided he was going to climb the tree in their front yard. It was a fairly young tree, so the branches were low, so Chris was able to climb about halfway up. But then when he decided it was time to come down, he couldn't get down. So he started yelling, calling for my sister, calling Mom. And then my sister got outside. She looked up, when she finally figured out where Chris was, she looked up at him and said, "Chris," or maybe she said, "Christopher, how did you get up there?" And I said, "I climbed up." Chris climbed up. But it was easier for Chris to climb up than it was for him to get down. Because the tree that Chris decided to climb up was a holly tree. Now, you know what holly trees look like, right? With their little sharp leaves that have those little sharp points on them. You can get pretty scratched up if you brush up against them. So Chris got up there and he couldn't figure out how to get down. Now, Zacchaeus heard that Jesus was coming. Word had gotten out that Jesus was passing through the town of Jericho. Zacchaeus was curious. He wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to see who this person was that everyone was excited about, who everyone wanted to see. He wanted to see who this person was. But Zacchaeus was a short man. He couldn't see through the crowd. He couldn't see Jesus coming. You know what it's like when you have people taller than you sitting in front of you or standing in front of you. You can't see, especially when you're in a crowd. Like when you're watching a parade and there's people standing in front of you, you might try to maneuver around so you can get closer to the curb. Zacchaeus wanted to see. So he climbs up a sycamore tree to see. A sycamore tree had low branches. For all we know, Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus that day. But Zacchaeus experienced much more. He not only did he see Jesus, he met Jesus. Zacchaeus was probably a little surprised that Jesus called him by name when Jesus looked up at the tree. Do you think that maybe Jesus saw Zacchaeus running down the road and watched him climb up the tree? Maybe. Jesus said, "Zacchaeus, come down here at once. I must stay at your home today." Do you hear the urgency in Jesus' voice? Jesus called him by name to get his attention. Then Jesus told Zacchaeus not just to come down, but to come down at once. Come down right this minute. Then Jesus says, I must stay at your home today. Jesus says, I must. Not Zacchaeus, I need a place to stay tonight. Can you help me out? Could I stay with you? But Jesus didn't ask. Jesus is very direct with Zacchaeus. Now Jesus knew, since Zacchaeus was a tax collector, that he had a nice home and had enough room. Now let's look at it from Zacchaeus' perspective. He only wanted to see Jesus. Now he was actually meeting him, and Jesus was going to be staying in his home. Was Zacchaeus excited, honored to have Jesus as a guest? Was he afraid or concerned and wondering why Jesus wanted to stay with him? Was he in trouble? How would you feel if someone came up to you and said, I must stay at your home? Would you welcome them? Would you be thinking, oh no, there's dishes in the sink. I didn't have time to do them this morning. Or would your mind be racing about what condition your home was in? I didn't have time to pick up. Your mind's racing. You can fill in the blanks. We've all been there. We don't always leave our homes like we're expecting company, let alone someone important like Jesus, someone everyone wants to see. We don't know anything about the personal life of Zacchaeus. We do know that he was a chief tax collector. Some translations use the word ruler. He was a person of power. He was considered to be a supervisor or a manager. He was an employer to others. He was overseeing the work of other tax collectors. Since tax collectors could charge whatever they wanted, the important objective was that the Roman government got its share. So let's say you had a tax bill for $2,000, the tax collector could add another $250 to it, so your total bill would be $2,500. As we have talked about tax collectors, they were the most disliked people. After they paid the Roman government, the rest was profit for them. So if they charged you $250 and really your bill was only $2,000, that was $250 that they got. Zacchaeus was probably deeply involved in the corruption going on at that time. He, along with the tax collectors he supervised, were getting rich off their hard work of their neighbors who couldn't afford to pay. He was a person people dreaded to see. We do know that he was short and he was rich. He was probably on top of his profession, wealthy, and lived in a nice house. So maybe because he was small, he tried to compensate his feelings of inferiority by earning as much money as he possibly could. So he was in this vicious cycle where he exploited others, so he would feel good about himself, he would buy nice things, then he would be rejected, then the cycle would repeat itself. It was a cycle of greed. Unlike Chris, Zacchaeus had no trouble climbing down that tree. He came down quickly. Now, that may have took some doing, because usually when you're climbing down, you go slow as not to misplace your foot or miss a branch and fall. We're told Zacchaeus came down joyfully and welcomed Jesus. What was his motive for seeing Jesus? Was he searching for something? Or did he just want to see Jesus for himself? Now just think how ridiculous he looked. We know that he was a wealthy man. He had power. People were afraid of him. And here he is running down the road, probably in his best clothes, and he climbed a tree. Jesus looks up at Zacchaeus looks at him, makes eye contact with him, and Jesus invites himself into Zacchaeus' home. Now, this was not acceptable. Jesus continues to be guilty of hanging out with the wrong kind of people. Jesus was selective. Jesus chooses Zacchaeus out of all the people in the crowd that day and extends a personal invitation. Jesus wanted to visit Zacchaeus in his home so they could have a private conversation. They could get to know each other, develop a relationship. Jesus wanted to share a meal. This was an act of hospitality. It was important to Jesus. Now, those in the crowd were upset. They were grumbling. Here Jesus goes again. There were probably hundreds of thousands in the crowd that day, and Jesus chooses Zacchaeus, the most hated, the most unpopular man in town. So there was a lot of grumbling, a lot of complaining going on. Now, isn't that the reason why Jesus came to be with us on earth and to make his way to the cross to welcome all? Who wants to come to our home and have dinner with us? Who is willing to overlook our shortcomings and our faults? Jesus, who came not to judge but to save. Think about it. Jesus was acting as a host rather than as a guest. Zacchaeus was motivated by curiosity. Jesus was motivated by love. Jesus extends an invitation to Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was changed. Now, Zacchaeus does two things. First, he comes down a tree quickly, which took some doing probably. Then he stopped and said, Jesus, I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much. Zacchaeus wants Jesus to know he has changed. Jesus says, today salvation has come to this household because he too is a son of Abraham. The human one came to seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus was once lost and now he's found. Zacchaeus has been forgiven. Jesus came to seek and to save the least and the last. And that is true for you and for me. We all have done things that we're not proud of. We have had times when we feel as though we're up a tree and we can't come down. We feel we will never recover from our messes. Jesus came to invite us to come down, to come out from under our messes, to offer us forgiveness. Zacchaeus realized that day that God loved him, that God could love a chief tax collector. Zacchaeus felt closeness to God. He wanted and was ready to be in relationship. That is why he climbed down that tree so quickly. He was ready, he was happy to welcome Jesus into his home. Zacchaeus was ready to accept God's grace. Grace being a gift God gives to us. Today we remember the saints that have gone before us. Those individuals who had major impact on our lives. Those who taught us and shared their gifts with us. Those who made us to be the person we are today. Who are your saints? A lot of our saints are people just like Zacchaeus. They were once lost. They drifted but found their way back. I think of my dad as a saint. My dad grew up in a family that only went to church on Christmas and Easter. And when my mom, my sister and I would go to church, my dad usually didn't go. He would go on those special occasions. But after my sister and I left home, he started going to church on a regular basis with my mom. My dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. My dad would go to his treatments of chemo and radiation. Others would be receiving treatments in the same area. My dad would be the one cheering others on when they were having a rough day. One time I was with my dad when he was undergoing chemo treatment, and one of the patients said, I want what he's having, because my dad was always so upbeat. The staff often said my dad made their day. He was always upbeat, he was always cheerful. When he learned someone had been diagnosed with cancer, he would talk with them and cheer them on, so to speak. He would tell them they can do it, they can go through with the treatments. Who are your saints? Who was involved in making you into the person you are today? You see, in order to be a saint, you don't have to be famous. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be dead. You could be sitting right here in the pews today. You don't have to be you just have to be the person God created you to be and is calling you to be. And you don't have to do it all alone either. You're living among saints right here. And all those saints who have gone before us are cheering us on because they are a part of who you are. We're all joined together, surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, the communion of saints. Zacchaeus came down out of that tree quickly. I envision Jesus reaching up his hand to help Zacchaeus down. Think about those that have helped you, that have extended a hand to you, that are your saints. Amen.